Hello and welcome to Newspeak. The last Newspeak, in fact, before the election, which of course is next Thursday, July the 4th. Delighted, as usual, to be joined by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow and Royal Historian, and Amy Gallagher of Stand Up to Woke. First things first, Rafe, you were up in Newcastle this week, weren't you? It's Newcastle at events. How did that go?
It was wonderful, actually.
Yeah?
This is part of our NCF Locals scheme, and they have a very active group there. They've had 3 meetings already, and so they very kindly invited me up there for an evening with Rafe, like one of those old ITV shows. And extremely engaged audience, about 40 people or so. And I was really impressed with the quality of the discussion. Everybody was really interested in doing what they can to fight back against all the nonsense we have in this world. And I left there actually feeling really, really encouraged, because of course this is just one of 30 of our branches,
Yes,
you know, and they're very vibrant. And Newcastle itself I'd never been to before, and I absolutely adored the place. I thought it was such a wonderfully dynamic and, you know, obviously very, very sort of lively city and everything else. So all in all, it was a great trip.
It was good. Do you know Newcastle? Have you been to
No,
Newcastle?
I've not been there.
I have been to Newcastle. I went to it a couple of years ago. It is a beautiful city too. It's like Bath. And people, people, it's in some ways a bit of a secret in that way, actually.
It's absolutely, and people often think about Arvida Zane Pet and all this sort of a thing, and there's a stereotype there. Well, I'm sorry, I walked around there, and the place is so lively, and it's been gentrified in such great ways. Nicholas Pevsner, the great architectural historian, called Grey Street in Newcastle the finest curved street in the world. It's very reminiscent of parts of Bath, for example, or even parts of a lot of it looks like Edinburgh along the riverfront.
Yes.
So yeah,
It's lovely.
that's your tourism promotion for Newcastle this summer, for a staycation.
No, it'd be good. Also, I was up in Wellingborough talking with Ben Habib, who's Reform's deputy leader, and again, it's a good event. These have been one of our great success stories, I think, for the Newcastle Forum. With that in mind, this is by nature of a save the date, because it's not for quite a while, but on July the 10th, right, so a few weeks' time, there is going to be a locals event in Beaconsfield with Eric Kaufman, the writer who you probably have seen on this channel a number of times. He's got a new book out called Taboo, and he's actually going to be speaking to our Beaconsfield branch, if you like, on the 10th of July. So we'll give you details near the time, but just to keep that in mind, 10th of July, if you are near and about Beaconsfield. He's a lovely man and a very interesting one too, Eric. Now, I mentioned the election there. You might remember some time ago we produced this book, State of Emergency, which sold very well as well, I'm very pleased to say, being as we are a think tank. And we had 10 pledges in it, which we said we were going to give to the candidates at this general election, which we have duly done. So Rafe looked after the whole sort of, sending out of these things and collating them. And so we're going to sort of look now at what kind of response we've had. So before actually we do that, I think I should read out just briefly the 10 pledges to remind you, okay? So won't take long. There should be an image coming up on your screen now of these pledges, but here they go. Number 1, there must be a permanent end to mass migration. Number 2, the UK must withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights. 3, the Equality Act of 2010 should be abolished. 4, the thorough, balanced history of Britain and its achievements must be taught to every pupil in every school to the age of 16. 5, it must be stated unequivocally that there is no blasphemy law in this country. 6, the concepts in law of hate and harmful speech should be scrapped. Number 7, there must be a complete ban on the teaching as though it were fact of critical race theory and gender ideology in our schools. 8, there must be a ban on compulsory attendance at DEI and unconscious bias sessions and any associated ideologically driven schemes. Number 9, all institutions and quangos, and there are hundreds, including publicly funded broadcasters, which stray from their core purpose of prioritising ideology over what they should be doing, should lose their public funding. And number 10, those bodies which, instead of promoting Britain and caring for its history and heritage, in fact, rather than that, actually actively undermine it, should be replaced by one that does, or all public funding should be withdrawn. I've raced through those a bit there because you might be familiar with them. But now, Rafe, can you explain what we did with these pledges? From word go.
Yes, so firstly, our thanks to Mark Quinlan and Kevin, our membership administrator, both of whom had the arduous and unenviable task of emailing hundreds of candidates to ask them whether or not they would support our pledges.
Right.
Now, we didn't bother emailing the Greens or the Labour Party, so we emailed the Reform Party, the SDP and the Conservative Party candidates standing across the country to ask whether they would support us or not. We had 170 responses, which actually we understand is very good in terms of how people normally respond to such things. Of the 170 responses, 140 in total said yes, 26 said no. That doesn't mean they don't support them, but some of them didn't feel comfortable putting their name to things, and 4 agreed with most of the pledges. Now that splits down to 110 people from Reform replied, 87 of whom said yes, they do support all 10 pledges. 2 said they support most of the pledges, and 21 either said no or they didn't feel comfortable. 55 members of the SDP party said that they responded. 52 of them said they support them all, and 3 didn't feel comfortable responding. And then, of course, the largest party of all the Conservatives, we had 5 responses. And of those, 1 said yes, 2 said broadly supportive, and 2 refused to sign. Now, what we're going to do with these, we aren't going to shame those who didn't want us to reply or whatever, but all those who said yes, they do support our pledges, or they mostly support our pledges, we're going to have all of those names up on our website, hopefully by the time that you're actually watching this, which is going to be Saturday morning. So you'll be able to go to our website and see which candidates are actually supporting our pledges. And if one of those candidates, or 2 of them, happen to be in your own constituency, you'll know where they stand on the issues that are closest to us and most likely are closest to you.
Great. What's your response to that, Amy? Do you think it's, are you surprised? I'm not, actually.
No, I think it's quite good. I mean, when I was running as a mayoral candidate in the London elections, I got approached by lots of organisations saying, will you support this, will you support that? And I was always quite hesitant to, because I'd look into the organisation a bit and I was like, I don't fully understand them, I don't know enough about them, and I'd see things that were a bit dubious, so I'd either not respond or I'd say, thank you, but no thank you. And I suspect the candidates that haven't responded, or maybe have responded in uncertain terms, maybe that they haven't heard of No Culture Forum and they don't have the time to look into us and understand what we're about. And a lot of Reform and SDP candidates will be running for the first time, so they might be quite anxious, they might be quite hesitant to say or do anything. So I think that you've got 170 candidates responding, and most of Reform candidates are saying that they agree, and 55 of SDP candidates are saying they also agree, is really good, actually. I know William Clouston's very supportive of New Culture Forum, William Clouston of the SDP, and that Reform are. So I think it's a good response. As I said, a lot of candidates are hesitant to say or do anything. So I think it's positive.
I think, yes, as you say, Ray, sorry, I think a lot of parties often have a policy against signing pledges for very good reasons. So in fact, I think people, as you say, were saying, I go along with it, but I can't do it.
Yeah, but it's a very important point Amy makes. For example, we know Richard Tice was very supportive of this book. In fact, he was saying at one point he'd like all candidates to actually see these pledges. It's not an outright endorsement, but at least, very, very supportive of it. And also, of course, William Clouston himself replied and said he supports all 10 pledges. So the leader of the SDP and also the SDP party secretary have both signed up to all the pledges.
And the deputy leader of Reform, Ben Habib.
And the deputy leader of Reform, Habib. So that's not bad for a royal flush, I think.
No, it's pretty good. I think it's interesting. The one thing that I find most interesting about it, actually, is that, as you said, I mean, when you were standing for mayor, and it was the same when I was standing, whenever you would get so many of these things,
Yes.
but it was usually just one question. But people have signed up to 10.
Yes, it's a lot, yeah.
10. Well, most of them have. So I think job well done, don't you? I mean, I think, I think it's a very, very good thing. Now buy the book, so you can read them again. But as Rafe said, we will obviously be putting up who has got back to us. And so therefore, you'll know who agrees with us. That's one good bit of electoral action, I think. Let's turn our gaze downwards, shall we, to the sewer, and what's been happening recently. Some people have been having a quiet flutter, haven't they?
Yeah, well, the betting scandal that's been happening. So, I mean, last week I was saying about how awful the Tory party campaign had been, and I was sort of thinking it can't get any worse. They're lying low now, but we have seen this recently a scandal round. I think there's been about 5 Tory party candidates, or maybe more, that have essentially placed bets on the date of the election. And there's now an inquiry into why they've done it. I guess the allegation is that cheating has happened, which would be a criminal offence. It's against the law to cheat when gambling. Essentially, that there's members that have betted on the date of the election and betted that it's July the 4th, and some of them have links to kind of campaign managers, and I think one of them is a data specialist within the Tory party. So it may well be that the suspicion is that they knew that the date of the election would be the 4th of July, and that's why they bet. And I mean, since then there's been some security guards and people working within policing that have also been embroiled in this, and there has actually been a Labour candidate as well that's been accused of betting. I think they bet against themselves. They bet that they would themselves lose their seat or that lose the election. But I think it just does. For a lot of people, it brings to mind kind of the expenses scandal or the Partygate scandal, where Boris kind of broke lockdown rules, or even under John Major, the cash for questions scandal. The idea of kind of politicians acting in a way that they shouldn't, essentially, that's unprofessional and is sleazy and is all about themselves. And although a particular Labour candidate was involved in this, I think it has been the Tory party that are being seen to be held, being blamed for this more so than anyone else. And it's just, Rishi Sunak has acted on this. He said he withdraws his support from anybody that's caught up in the scandal, and there is an internal inquiry now into these particular candidates. I should say none of them have been charged with anything, so it's under investigation. They may well not have known, but even if they didn't know about the date of the election and it was just completely, it's an inappropriate thing to do. You'd think that politicians would know. It seems a bit odd for me to place a bet on something when I'm myself a candidate. So I think it's just further reduced people's confidence in the Tory party, but in politics more general. It just speaks to the general distrust of politicians, actually.
Or distrust, and also basically just, this is really low down, low rent stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at just the worst possible timing, it stirs up all of the most negative emotions people have and feelings about politicians in general, but also more specifically about Conservative politicians, that they're in it for themselves, that this is simply a game to many of them, that they don't really care about any of this, and that essentially they are engaged in those same sort of issues of there's one rule for us, there's one rule for everybody else, how can we make a quick buck on all of this? And yeah, it does remind people of the expenses scandal very much. It does remind people of Partygate. And, Rishi Sunak was supposed to be a break from the chaos of Boris Johnson and all that, and a break from the sort of a quick free market buccaneers of Liz Truss. But this brings back all of that. It should be said, Guido Fawkes, the website, has reported that the head of public affairs at the Gambling Commission is actually a dyed-in-the-wall Labour member who's worked on many Labour campaigns. And so there's an idea that he was possibly the one who leaked all of this information deliberately to scupper the Tories. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. In a way, it's not irrelevant because this may not have come to light. I'm sure that at every previous election this has happened. I'm sure under Blair, I'm sure under John Major, there has always been this sort of a flutter. And so I don't think this is an exceptional story, but it's just the first one, I think, that's been made public. But it has come at, this has been the most disastrous We thought that Theresa May's campaign was a disastrous election campaign. This, I think, will go down in the annals of history. From the moment they walked out in the rain, it's been just one, you thought things couldn't get any worse being 20 points below, and just been nothing but a catalogue of catastrophes.
Actually, it's interesting, that in fact this happens every time, really, with elections, is that when you look at the polls, we all do all the time, essentially they haven't really moved much. I mean, the level of kind of what you might call it a scandal, if it's scandal, is kind of quite minor, isn't it? I mean, there's been I don't even know how much interest is there. I mean, apart from Farage and Reform, looking around, being around, I don't see any sign of any posters or anything very much. Do you?
No, it's a good point. For either parties, for Starmer or for Rishi. I think there's a lot of apathy. I think a lot of people feel disengaged from politics. And I think people will just, I think obviously the scandal seems to be more connected with the Tory party than the Labour Party. But I think people just generally feel let down by politicians in general. And that is why people, I think, are being drawn to Reform, because there is an idea of them being anti-establishment. There's an idea of Nigel Farage being much more authentic. He's quite Trumpian in some ways. He owns things. He's not doing that kind of giving a politician's answer. So I think it just, if anything, it probably benefits Reform.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the one thing that the press have really leapt on is, in fact, what Nigel said about Ukraine, isn't it? I mean, do you think that, to say he damaged him in the eyes of the public, there are some people who are never going to like him, right? But do you think it's made any difference to the Reform vote?
I think it will have. Those people who adore Nigel Farage will, of course, still vote for Nigel Farage and for the Reform Party. But we've seen an uplift since Farage took over the Reform Party, an increase in support for Reform. And, we're not talking about people who would have voted Reform anyway. We're talking about undecided voters who would have voted Tory, who are now thinking about voting for Reform. And I do think it was a misstep. I think, there's a lot of validity to what he was saying, but I think he could have phrased it better in that Nick Robinson interview and lay out exactly what he means, putting the blame on Putin, but saying that there are other issues at play here. And I do think there will be people who might have considered voting for Reform who are thinking twice about it now.
Yes. Although I suppose at the same time, they've sort of, Reform are sort of pretty much on this figure now, aren't they? Bubbling under 20%, something like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you mentioned before we came on air, did you see the crowds, the line down in, get this right, 24 hours notice down in, I think it was Devon.
Yeah.
And they had 24 hours notice, 1,500 people turned up.
It's remarkable. Yeah, I think British politics has never seen anything like this. It feels very Trumpian to me, like the way that Farage is, on stage with a whole audience, with people lining up. We don't see this anywhere near as much passion for political leaders in this country that we usually do in America, but it does feel like it feels quite American, and it's very interesting to see British people lining up to see a politician of any ideological stripe, and it's quite I find it quite encouraging, actually.
Yes,
but,
so do I.
Yeah, but I think this Ukraine's issue, I think it does see the media absolutely turned on Nigel Farage, and I think it probably was not in his best interest to talk about this issue. He's been very consistent with his view on foreign policy and geopolitics, and what he said was perfectly legitimate, but of course the media have spun it to say that he's he he backs Putin, which of course he doesn't. He's just essentially giving a nuanced view on strategy. But I think the fact that it ran took, for a lot of Reform voters who are very pro-Britain and pro-the West, they will see it as kind of confusing or conflicting. But I think on the whole, other than that issue, I think Nigel Farage is doing very well. And I think almost as though we've moved on from that now, the Ukraine issue, and I think it's getting back to reform policies, and I think he's just doing very, very well on that. A lot of the campaign material was very, very good that Nigel is putting out.
I mean, it was very telling how quickly the media, every single media outlet apart from say GB News and Talk leapt on this and deliberately twisted the intention of what Nigel Farage was saying to put it in the worst possible light. And of course, people only read headlines. They don't really read into the depth of things. And so I think the media have done a huge disservice to the Reform Party, unsurprisingly, trying to tear it down. And the way that he was not necessarily misquoted, but quoted out of context was terrible. But one of the most interesting things, we've said now for many months or many years on this channel that we have the most radically left-wing youth in history. That's true. 75% of the youth in this country are going to vote for Labour or Greens or Lib Dems or communists or whatever. And the number voting for Tories, we've known for a while, is only 8%. Now, we've known that. What's most interesting is the latest polls are showing 15% of people 18 to 24 are voting for the Reform Party.
Really?
And that is absolutely fascinating, because you would not naturally think that Reform would be able to attract that many young people, twice the number of the Tories. And so whilst we're not quite on that sort of European French scale of a youth revolt, I think we do have something very fascinating going on here, which could be capitalized and could grow into something equivalent to what we see in Europe in the next decade.
Actually, when we had the meeting last night, I brought this point up, actually, and Ben was not aware of it. Ben Habib took great, encouragement from it, that in fact it might just be a hatred of the Tories.
Yeah.
I thought actually it was, maybe I'm wrong, I thought it was a bit more than 15. I had 21% in my mind.
No, I think it's 15. I think it's 23 with voting right-wing, voting Tory and voting Reform.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I mean, there is something. You sort of purely anecdotally, you meet a lot of young people, and he said as well, Nigel, there's something happening out there, particularly with young people. I think possibly there's a bit of a sex divide.
Yes.
I think it's probably more a masculine thing.
But if you look in France, for example, this young chap Bardella, the reason he's become so popular is because he's using TikTok. And it's TikTok that has enabled him to connect with the youth. And that's exactly what Farage is doing. He's got a young chap called Jack Anderton who's
been on the channel.
He's been on this channel, 23-year-old. He's masterminding Farage's TikTok. And I think, and there's nothing equivalent to that on the Tory side. And I think it could be actually simply the fact of TikTok that's getting the message out to the youth of this country.
But I also think Nigel is appealing to young people's spirit of rebellion, and change and wanting to renew things, which ordinarily the left kind of have a sort of hold on. But actually, people are now seeing Nigel Farage as the true rebellion or the true heretic. I mean, he's been debanked. He's saying he's speaking for taboos. I saw some footage of a young kind of all-male kind of rock band who were getting support, who were asking Nigel Farage to speak for them and speak supportively about them. And you just see how things have changed. That young kind of rebellious people who have had enough are looking to Farage rather than the left to speak for them. So it is very interesting times. Kind of we're seeing things that ordinarily we haven't seen.
There is this, what you might call the absolutely fabulous kind of situation, which is where, if you remember that great show, is that the older generation, the kind of druggy, hippie, Jennifer Saunders character. And the daughter is very prissy and puritanical. It was actually quite before its time, actually, when I think about it. Because she would be completely woke now, the daughter character, if you remember in that. Before we sign off, if you say, here we go, already people are doing post-mortems on things. But it's worth us looking a bit about what's in your water, as they used to say, Rafe, about the results. Do you think, what would what would you expect to happen? Do you think it's going to be 53 seats for the Tories or 7 for Reform or what? Have you got...
Well, I've been very consistent in my, since the election was called, or however many weeks ago that was. I originally said I expected the Tories to have 100 or fewer seats left in Parliament. And then when Nigel Farage took over the leadership of Reform, I said that the Tories will get between 80 to 100. And I'm sticking with that. So let's see if I'm accurate there. I think there will be, a 200-odd seat majority for the Labour Party. And I think there'll be an existential crisis for the Tories, which is the only way we have any chance of getting a proper Conservative Party reborn, whether it be through a merger with Reform in the future, what shape that new Conservative Party will be. We've only got a Conservative and name-only party. And I think it may possibly be able to get 5, maybe 6. I've seen estimates of 7 seats for Reform, but I would think perhaps 5 or 6 is not unreasonable to expect.
What about you?
Yeah, I think, the predictions for Reform is that it's anywhere between 3 and 7 seats. I think they'll do quite well. I'm expecting kind of like Rafe, 5 or 6 seats. The Tory party, I originally said kind of 120 seats. I'm now thinking it's probably more like what Rafe said, at 80 to 100, because they've had such an awful campaign. We also know that the Liberal Democrats will be doing very well, actually, out of this, which some of us will be baffled by. But I guess for a lot of people, when they...
Lovely understatement.
Yeah, their campaign has just been him, Ed Davies, sort of larking about and doing obstacle courses and all sorts of things. But, to be fair, unlike the Tories, he hasn't got into any controversy or anything that would be off-putting for some people. I think a lot of people, when they don't like Labour or Tory, they just default to the Lib Dems. So the Lib Dems are really benefiting from that. People are even saying that we might see the kind of Tory party and the Lib Dems neck and neck, which is just extraordinary given the fact that the Tory party are probably the most successful political party in history, that they're now neck and neck with the third party. But I think Nigel Farage will, and the thing that I'm quite excited about is that Nigel Farage looks like he's going to become an MP, which is quite exciting.
Yes.
Going forward, I think it'd be very interesting to see him in Parliament. And I think what will happen is, I think after this election will be a reconsideration, hopefully, of the Tory party and the leadership going forward. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. I think
I think Nigel's going to win, but what I'm very curious about, because I've seen a lot of this on the internet, is the most bizarre form of tactical voting where Labour and Lib Dems and Greens are talking about voting Conservative because of their visceral hatred for Farage. So they're saying, hold your nose and vote Tory so that we can keep Farage out. So that's one potential sort of thing, but I don't know how well mobilised they are on that.
Yes, I think it's also it's interesting, this idea that they might have, say, like 3 MPs, 5 MPs. To me, that would still be a startling success. It would, because UKIP, 4 million votes, got 1 MP. That's sort of like, embedded in one's brain. So anything more than that, is it bridgehead? It's a bridgehead you're forward. So I think that what we're going to be doing on this show, and obviously, is charting in a more maybe philosophical sense in the future where things are going to go. But in terms of practicality, we're talking seats and the lower end for the Tories, aren't we? Really? Well, all will become clear, won't it?
Yes.
So this is going out on this Saturday, which I think is very end of June. Yes, great mathematical brain here. So it's next Thursday, the election. I will certainly be sitting up, I'm sure. Well, actually, will you be watching?
Well, I'm going to be in the remote countryside of Poland.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Very badly timed. There's a family reunion for all the Heydels around the world. So, unfortunately, I hope that they have Wi-Fi.
Heydel
so I
voice.
can.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, look, have a lovely time, won't
Thank
you?
you.
And you'll be sitting up, I will be.
Well, I'll be trying to. With all of these things, I'll say I'll sit up, and then it gets to kind of late into the night, depending on how exciting it is.
Yes.
And
I think everyone's
yes.
waiting, aren't they, for this kind of were you up for Portillo moment, do you remember that? Or did you actually watch that when Portillo lost his seat in the 1997?
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks very much, Amy. Thanks, Rafe. And, anyway, enjoy your week. There'll be a lot to talk about, if nothing else. and we shall see you in a few weeks' time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.